Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Farbach. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has made history Monday with the first visit by an Indian leader to Slovakia since the country gained independence in 1993, elevating bilateral ties to strategic partnership and opening new avenues for cooperation in defense, AI, and manufacturing. Now, the visit comes amid a broader European tour that has taken Modi from a major innovation summit in Nice to meetings with Central European policymakers. Now, what makes this for the region and what it means for the region we'll now discuss with Swaran Singh, professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University. Good to have you with us. Welcome.
Thank you.
So on first glance, coming to the G7, I mean, that's something very much on a strategic interest for India, but then also making this trip to Slovakia, a very small European country in Central Eastern Europe. Why now? Why wait so long? And why Slovakia specifically?
That's true. It's been overdue for a long time that Indian Prime Minister should have visited Slovakia. But better late than never. So in last 4 or 5 years, there is a visible upswing in terms of high-level visits on both sides. We had the Slovakian President, Peter, visiting India's AI Impact Summit this year in February. And of course, Indian President had visited also in April last year. And of course, Indian Prime Minister, as you mentioned just yesterday, paid a visit to Slovakia. This also reflects a very significant partnership across several sectors. Particularly, I think Slovakia is today world's #1 in terms of per capita production of cars. So in that sense, in the month of May, which is last month, India had a sale of cars of about 500,000, which means India has enormous consumption, production and use sale of cars. And that makes them really close partners between two sides. India not only just purchases various cars produced in Slovakia, for example, Porsche, Audi, Skoda, Land Rover, Kia, and so on. But lately, partnership has also expanded to India supplying automobile components into that production. And only yesterday, they have signed also the skilled manpower mobility agreement, which means India would also be contributing in terms of manpower in production of cars in Slovakia. Of course, from there, there is also important component of defense cooperation, which goes back to Soviet times when Czechoslovakia was an important supplier. And that relationship has moved, of course, into a partnership of co-designing, co-production. And indeed, some defense technologies are now today also exported from India to Slovakia. The third important component, which India is very, very constantly looking to expand, is nuclear power generation. And Slovakia has about 65% of electricity coming from nuclear power, which means India can learn a great deal in terms of maintaining, operating, decommissioning, waste management, and so on in terms of nuclear power generation. And a whole lot of other sectors where they are talking of cooperation in education sector, in research and development in general, in artificial intelligence, in space cooperation, and so on. So a whole range of new avenues are being sort of accelerated where two sides are willing to cooperate, where I think advanced technologies and advanced manufacturing experience of Slovakia will be useful in India's centennial goals in terms of technology or development in various sectors. So I think it's a significant visit, and hopefully more visits will follow from here. And it's a reflection of India placing enormous significance. Indeed, they have upgraded, elevated their relationship to call it comprehensive partnership, which means they are exploring a whole range of sectors where they wish to work together with each other. So given the fact that India is engaging European nations much more vigorously, particularly after early this year, India signed a free trade agreement with the European Union, there is going to be a greater momentum in bilateral relations of India, Slovakia, and of course, India and other European nations in general.
So you mentioned a lot of interesting sectors of cooperation from manufacturing, automotive, AI. I'm curious about the space element there for a moment. I think there's also an interesting story there that connects India and Slovakia. Tell us a bit more about that space cooperation between these two countries.
Thank you for asking that very interesting question, because India prides itself as far as its space explorations are concerned. And in June of 2017, when Slovakia had manufactured its first indigenously built satellite called SCUV, India's PSLV-38 had been the kind of rocket that had launched it. At that time, this was one of the satellites of 31 satellites that PSLV-3 was launching into space. Let me also share with you that India has emerged as a major sort of commercial launcher of various commercial satellites. I think by the last count, India had launched about 400 commercial satellites from about 30 countries in terms of becoming a very, very cost-effective and reliable provider of launching satellites into space. So that is another sector where I think India and Slovakia will again have a lot to learn from each other and work together.
And also, it's interesting because you mentioned this strategic relationship, this partnership that's been elevated to this level. We've already gone through a few of these areas. And I think Slovakia is not the only case. I mean, recently, there's also something, I think, in the last sort of 2 years with Poland, the Czech Republic. And a wider trend here, is India now more interested, in your sense, into Central and Eastern Europe? Will this kind of trend continue, more attention on this part of the world?
Absolutely. I think, as I mentioned, the fact that India has signed a free trade agreement with the European Union is the new framework in which India is exploring cooperation with the Central and East European countries, which have enormous advantage in several sectors where India can learn and cooperate. India has its own centennial goal of becoming a developed nation by 2047. And in that sector, in that sense, several sectors are where India and countries of Central and Eastern Europe can work together in terms of give and take. India, for example, is a leader today in terms of generic medicine. So pharmaceuticals is another area where India explores opportunities for exports or textiles or engineering goods, like I mentioned, automobile components. Likewise, we could also see certain best practices that already exist in some of these Central and East European countries, where India can contribute to their advanced manufacturing in terms of providing them skilled manpower. India has a very large number of youth, young, skilled manpower, particularly in STEM. And that is where every time India is engaging any of the European countries now, India wants to ensure a kind of workforce mobility agreement to also be placed in certain sort of focus area. So we could see more opportunities for Indian skilled manpower also appearing in European countries, especially in Central and East European nations, which are relatively new partnerships that India is now building compared to conventional understanding of India's partnerships were limited to Western Europe largely. And I think India is gradually moving and reclaiming some of our past close cooperations with Eastern Bloc countries, where Central and Eastern European countries are now again emerging as major focus area for India, just like India also is now focusing on other parts of Europe like Caucasia or Baltic states. And likewise, I think India is looking at Europe as a collective and exploring with each of these nations as to what sectors where India can build much stronger partnerships for mutual benefit for both sides.
On that benefit,
and India has
if I
its
may.
own niche areas where India can work.
Yeah, on that mutual benefit, I just want to jump in on there because really briefly, I just want to get your sense. I mean, all this renewed attention on this part of the world, Central Eastern Europe, but also it's bringing the Prime Minister of India back to the G7. I mean, it's not a member of G7, but it's been invited. Tell us briefly the priorities that are important for India in these next couple of days.
Thank you again. It's a great recognition that G7 summits have invited India as a special invitee, and this is the 13th time, 8th consecutive invitation. It started in 2003. So it's a recognition that G7 countries find that partnership with India or deliberations where India should be on the high table is seen as significant. And as India goes to the high table, India is not only going to G7 with just its own national interests, but India is trying to represent at G7 the voice of global South countries, which are lately a very effective constituency which is engaging global governance. So things like United Nations reforms where a greater space should be provided for countries of global South or UN Security Council, etc. So it's basically India is sitting there more as a representative of global South countries. And of course, India has its own interests as well, where I think this kind of being there will help in several meetings on the sidelines. For example, Indian Prime Minister is meeting national leaders from Canada, from Britain, of course from France, where which is the host, and likely meeting with President Donald Trump. So this provides an opportunity for also, on the sidelines have bilateral meetings, which also help us sometimes resolve some of the ticklish or complex issues. So I think it's a significant invitation, and India attaches enormous importance to this invitation.
All right, so very important voice, another important voice at that table, as you said. Look, we'll close it there. Thank you so much. Really insightful interview there with you, Professor Swaran Singh. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for watching World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World for more. Goodbye.